You feel like you have to fight for everything at work, every idea, every project, every chance to move up. You're tired of all the drama and arguments, while other people seem to get what they want without all the stress and conflict. I am Sun Tzu, and I figured out the biggest secret in all of history. You can win without fighting at all. What I'm going to teach you will change how you deal with problems at work, showing you how to get what you want while staying calm and keeping people on your side. The same tricks that helped me win battles 2,500 years ago will help you win at work today, without making enemies or burning yourself out. First, hit like on this video, subscribe for more life-changing tips, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how many places need to learn this ancient secret. Let me tell you about the day that changed everything I thought I knew about winning. I was young, maybe 25, and I believed that being a great general meant being the fiercest fighter. I had studied all the military texts, practiced with every weapon, and thought victory came from overwhelming force. I was wrong, and that mistake almost cost me everything. My first real command was defending a border town against raiders who had been terrorizing the region for months. These weren't organized soldiers, they were desperate men who fought like wild animals because they had nothing to lose. I planned what I thought was a brilliant assault. We would charge at dawn, surround them, and crush them with superior numbers. And training the battle was a disaster. Yes, we won, but at what cost? Half my men were wounded or dead, the town was partially destroyed, and the survivors scattered only to regroup later. I sat in my tent that night, staring at a silk banner we had captured, and I realized something that would haunt me. Every drop of blood spilled could have been avoided. The banner became my teacher. It was beautiful, unmarked by battle, and it represented something I had never considered: victory without violence. I began to study not just how to fight, but how to avoid fighting altogether. I spent months talking to merchants, diplomats, and even former enemies. I learned that most conflicts came from misunderstanding, fear, or unmet needs that could be addressed without weapons. My next opportunity came 6 months later. Another group of raiders threatened a different village, but this time I tried something completely different. Instead of preparing for battle, I prepared for conversation. I learned everything I could about these men, why they raided, what they needed, what they feared. I discovered they weren't evil. They were hungry farmers whose crops had failed. I met with their leader under a white flag. I didn't bring weapons or threats. I brought a proposal. We had extra grain in our stores, and they had knowledge of mountain passes that could help our trade routes. Within 2 hours, we had an agreement. They became our scouts and guards for merchant caravans, and we provided them with steady food and pay. Not a single person died. The village was protected. The raiders became productive members of society, and I learned the most important lesson of my life: the supreme victory is achieved without fighting. That bloodless banner still hangs in my memory as the symbol of true strength. It taught me that anyone can destroy, but it takes real skill to build. Anyone can start a fight, but it takes wisdom to prevent one. The strongest generals aren't the ones who win the most battles, they're the ones who don't need to fight them. This is what I want you to understand about your workplace challenges. Every argument, every political battle, every conflict you think you need to win through force, there's almost always a better way. The colleagues who seem to glide through office politics without stress aren't lucky or weak. They've learned what took me years to discover. The art of winning without fighting is the highest form of skill. There was a bronze mirror in my quarters that I looked into every morning, not to check my appearance, but to remind myself of a truth that most people never understand. The reflection showed me that the greatest battles are won in the mind before any external action takes place. This mirror taught me that supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Most people think strength means being the loudest voice in the meeting, the person who argues most forcefully, or the one who never backs down from a confrontation. I used to think this way too. I believed that respect came from being feared, that authority came from demonstrating power, and that winning meant making others lose. The mirror showed me how wrong I was. True strength is being so prepared, so strategically positioned, and so skilled at understanding human nature that conflicts resolve themselves before they begin. When I mastered this principle, I found that my reputation became my greatest weapon. People knew that opposing me was pointless, not because I would crush them, but because I would find a way for both of us to get what we wanted. Let me share an example from my military experience. There was a fortress that had never been conquered in over 100 years. Previous generals had thrown thousands of soldiers at its walls, creating mountains of corpses, but never taking the stronghold. When I was assigned to capture it, everyone expected another bloody siege. Instead, I studied the fortress for weeks. I learned about the people inside, their supply lines, their fears, and their needs. I discovered that they weren't fighting for ideology or hatred. They were terrified of what would happen to their families if they surrendered. So instead of attacking the walls, I attacked their fear. I sent messages assuring safe passage for families, offering positions in my army for their soldiers, and guaranteeing that their local customs would be respected. I made surrender more attractive than resistance. Within a month, they opened the gates voluntarily. No blood was shed, and I gained not just a fortress, but skilled soldiers and grateful citizens. This is supreme excellence, achieving your objectives so smoothly that it looks effortless to others. In your workplace, this principle transforms everything. Instead of fighting for recognition, you position yourself so that opportunities naturally come to you. Instead of arguing for your ideas, you present them in ways that make others feel smart for agreeing. Instead of competing against colleagues, you find ways to make their success depend on yours. The mental shift required is profound. You must stop seeing workplace interactions as battles to be won, and start seeing them as puzzles to be solved. Every difficult colleague becomes a challenge to understand rather than an enemy to defeat. Every office conflict becomes an opportunity to demonstrate your strategic thinking rather than your fighting spirit. When you embrace supreme excellence, you become the person others come to for solutions rather than the person they brace themselves to fight against. Reputation shifts from someone who creates drama to someone who resolves it. And paradoxically, by refusing to fight, you become unbeatable. The mirror of true strength reflects this reality. The person who never needs to prove their power is the one who possesses the most of it. I carried a jade stone with me into every campaign, not as a lucky charm, but as a constant reminder that understanding myself was more valuable than knowing my enemy's plans. This stone forced me through a process of brutal self-examination that most people avoid their entire lives. But this self-knowledge became the foundation of every victory I achieved without fighting. Early in my career, I thought I knew myself well. I was confident, ambitious, and convinced of my own intelligence. Then I met an opponent who exploited every weakness I didn't even know I had. He triggered my pride by questioning my competence publicly. He made me angry by insulting my family's honor. He rushed me into decisions by creating false urgency. I fell for every trap because I didn't understand my own triggers and blind spots. That humbling experience taught me that self-knowledge isn't about knowing your strengths. Most people can list those easily. It's about understanding your emotional triggers, your unconscious biases, your patterns of reaction under stress, and the stories you tell yourself about why you do what you do. The jade stone became my tool for daily self-reflection. Every morning, I would hold it and ask myself hard questions. What am I afraid of today? What do I want so badly that I might make poor decisions to get it? What assumptions am I making that could be wrong? Where is my ego likely to lead me astray? What emotional buttons could someone push to manipulate me? This practice revealed uncomfortable truths. I discovered that I had a desperate need to be seen as clever, which made me overcomplicate simple situations. I learned that criticism of my plans triggered such strong defensiveness that I would argue for bad ideas just to avoid admitting mistakes. I realized that my fear of appearing weak often pushed me toward unnecessarily aggressive actions, but self-knowledge also revealed my natural advantages. I was genuinely curious about people, which made me good at understanding their motivations. I had patience when the situation required it, allowing me to wait for the right moment to act. I could admit uncertainty, which made people trust me with honest information. I was willing to appear foolish in small ways to gain larger advantages. In your workplace, this kind of self-assessment is just as crucial. You need to understand what triggers your defensive reactions during meetings. You need to know whether you're motivated more by recognition, security, achievement, or relationships. You need to recognize when your ego is making decisions instead of your judgment. Most workplace conflicts happen because people don't understand their own motivations and reactions. Someone criticizes your idea, and instead of hearing the feedback, you hear an attack on your competence. A colleague gets promoted, and instead of learning from their success, you feel personally diminished. A manager questions your approach, and instead of explaining your reasoning, you become defensive and argumentative. When you truly know yourself, you can catch these reactions before they escalate into conflicts. You can separate your ego from the situation and respond strategically, instead of emotionally. You can use your natural strengths deliberately and compensate for your natural weaknesses. The jade stone taught me that the person who understands themselves completely becomes nearly impossible to manipulate or defeat. They can't be baited into poor decisions because they know their triggers. They can't be deceived because they understand their own blind spots. And they can't be conquered because they've already mastered the most important battlefield, their own mind. The scroll of enemy hearts was my most prized possession, not because it contained military secrets, but because it taught me to understand not just what opponents do, but why they do it. This ancient intelligence revealed the path to influence without confrontation, showing me that every person's actions make perfect sense once you understand their inner world. I learned this lesson through a mistake that could have cost thousands of lives. I was facing a general who seemed completely unpredictable. His tactics made no strategic sense, his timing was erratic, and his decisions appeared random. My advisors called him crazy, but I suspected something deeper was driving his behavior. Instead of planning around his unpredictability, I decided to understand it. I spent weeks gathering information about his personal history, his family situation, his previous campaigns, and even his childhood. What I discovered changed everything. He wasn't unpredictable at all. Every seemingly random decision was driven by a deep fear of repeating a mistake that had cost him his brother's life years earlier. Once I understood his fear, his behavior became completely predictable. I could anticipate his moves because I understood the emotional logic behind them. More importantly, I could address his underlying concern rather than fighting his surface actions. I sent him information that proved his brother's death wasn't his fault, along with a strategy that would honor his brother's memory. He became my ally without a single battle. This taught me that opposition usually isn't personal, it's psychological. People aren't trying to hurt you, they're trying to protect something they value or get something they need. The colleague who argues with all your ideas isn't attacking you personally. They might be desperately trying to prove their own competence. The manager who micromanages isn't trying to control you. They might be terrified of being blamed for failures. In your workplace, understanding this changes everything. Instead of seeing difficult people as obstacles to overcome, you start seeing them as puzzles to solve. That colleague who shoots down ideas in meetings might be driven by perfectionism or fear of risk. The boss, who seems impossible to please, might be under pressure from their own superiors and feeling defensive about their position. I developed a systematic approach to understanding workplace personalities. I would observe what energized people and what drained them. I noticed what they talked about with passion and what topics made them uncomfortable. I paid attention to what they celebrated in others and what behaviors they criticized. Most importantly, I listened for what they were afraid of losing and what they desperately wanted to gain. This knowledge became my greatest tool for avoiding conflicts. When I understood that someone's resistance came from fear of change, I could address the fear instead of fighting the resistance. When I recognized that someone's aggression came from feeling unrecognized, I could provide recognition instead of matching their aggression. The scroll of enemy hearts taught me that there are no difficult people, lonely people whose motivations you don't yet understand. Once you decode the logic behind someone's behavior, you can find ways to work with that logic instead of against it. You can make them feel heard instead of attacked, valued instead of threatened, and included instead of opposed. This transforms opposition into collaboration and conflict into cooperation. The strategic game board in my tent was more than a planning tool. It was a teacher that showed me how placement determines outcomes before moves are made. Each carved piece represented not just troops, but the principle that where you position yourself is often more important than what you do once you're there. I learned this through one of my most memorable victories, achieved without drawing a single sword. Two rival armies were approaching each other across a valley, and everyone expected a massive battle at dawn. The enemy had superior numbers and better equipment. My advisors urged me to attack immediately while we still had some advantage of position. Instead, I did something that seemed like retreat. I moved my entire force to higher ground that overlooked the only water source in the region. By midday, both armies were desperately thirsty, but only one had access to water. The enemy general faced an impossible choice: attack uphill against a fortified position while his soldiers were dehydrated, or negotiate for water rights. He chose negotiation. By sunset, we had achieved everything we wanted through a trade agreement, and both armies had what they needed. Position had created victory without battle. This taught me that positioning isn't just about physical location, it's about placing yourself where good things naturally flow to you. In my military campaigns, I learned to position my forces where the enemy would have to fight at a disadvantage, where supply lines favored us, and where retreat would be easy if needed. But the deeper lesson was about positioning myself within relationships, conversations, and opportunities. In your workplace, positioning works the same way. The person who gets promoted isn't always the hardest worker. It's often the person who positioned themselves to be visible when opportunities arose. The colleague whose ideas get implemented isn't necessarily the most creative. They're the one who positioned their suggestions at the right time, to the right people, in the right way. I learned to position myself as the solution to problems that mattered to powerful people. Instead of fighting for attention, I made myself valuable to those who could advance my career. Instead of competing directly with rivals, I positioned myself in areas where my unique strengths created natural advantages. Instead of arguing for resources, I positioned my requests as solutions to my superiors' challenges. Strategic positioning also means choosing your battles with incredible care. I learned to ask myself, is this fight necessary? Is this the right time? Is this the right place? Do I have the right allies? What happens if I win? And what happens if I lose? Most importantly, is there a way to achieve my objective without fighting at all? The game board taught me that every position has advantages and disadvantages. The key is to choose positions where your natural strengths are amplified and your weaknesses are protected. If you're great with details but struggle with big picture thinking, position yourself where attention to detail is valued. If you're naturally collaborative but not competitive, position yourself where teamwork drives success. The most powerful positioning creates circumstances where you naturally win. When I positioned myself correctly, my opponents would often abandon their plans before engaging because fighting me became obviously disadvantageous. In your workplace, correct positioning means that opportunities come to you, people seek your input, and conflicts resolve in your favor without stress or drama. Remember, where you position yourself determines what's possible for you. Choose wisely. The bronze sundial in my quarters taught me patience and the critical importance of acting at precisely the right moment for maximum impact with minimum effort. But I learned this lesson the hard way, through one of my most devastating mistakes, a victory that became a disaster because of terrible timing. I had surrounded an enemy force and could have easily defeated them, but I was young and eager to prove myself. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment when they were completely weakened, I attacked as soon as I had the advantage. The battle was over quickly, but my premature action had consequences I never anticipated. The quick victory made neighboring kingdoms fearful of my growing power, and they formed an alliance against me that took years to resolve. That mistake taught me that timing isn't just about when to act, it's about understanding the full context of your actions and their ripple effects. The sundial became my daily reminder that patience often accomplishes more than force, and that the right action at the wrong time can be worse than no action at all. I began studying the rhythms of everything around me. I watched how seasons affected military campaigns, how political moods shifted over time, and how people's receptiveness to ideas changed based on their circumstances. I learned that every person, organization, and situation has natural cycles of openness and resistance, strength and vulnerability, optimism and doubt. In one campaign, I spent 6 months simply observing an enemy fortification without making any aggressive moves. My advisors thought I was being weak, but I was watching for the right moment. I noticed that morale dropped after long periods without pay, that security became lax during certain festivals, and that the commander's judgment was impaired when he was dealing with family problems back home. When all these factors aligned, I achieved in one night what would have taken months of fighting at any other time. In your workplace, timing is equally crucial. The same proposal can be rejected in January and enthusiastically approved in March, simply because of timing. The colleague who won't listen to feedback during a stressful project deadline might be completely receptive during a calm period. The boss who shoots down new ideas on Monday morning might love the same concept on Wednesday afternoon when they're feeling more optimistic. I learned to read workplace rhythms and cycles. I noticed when people were most open to new ideas, when they were feeling generous with recognition, and when they were looking for solutions to problems. I paid attention to budget cycles, performance review periods, and the emotional patterns of key decision makers. The art of timing also means knowing when to wait. I watched colleagues destroy their credibility by pushing too hard at the wrong moments, proposing changes when people weren't ready to hear them, or asking for promotions when the organization was focused on other priorities. They had good ideas and legitimate requests, but their timing turned potential allies into opponents. Patience became my secret weapon. When I wanted something, I would first create the conditions that would make others want to give it to me. Instead of asking for a promotion when I needed money, I waited until my boss needed someone for a high visibility project. Instead of proposing changes when people were stressed, I waited until they were frustrated with the current system and looking for alternatives. The sundial taught me that there's a perfect moment for every action, and that moment is worth waiting for. When you act at the right time, with the right people, Under the right circumstances, what seemed impossible becomes inevitable. Your timing determines whether you're swimming against the current or riding the wave to victory. The lacquered chest in my tent contained maps, tools, and plans that ensured I was always ready to seize opportunities without having to fight for them. This preparation chest represented a principle that most people miss. The battles you win are determined by the work you do before the fighting begins. True preparation creates options, and having options means you never have to force outcomes. I learned this during a campaign where I faced an opponent known for his unpredictability. Other generals had failed against him because they tried to react to his moves, always one step behind his changing tactics. I decided to prepare differently. Instead of planning one strategy, I prepared for every possible scenario I could imagine. I spent weeks mapping every possible route through the region, identifying every potential ally and enemy, stockpiling supplies in hidden locations, and training my troops for dozens of different battle formations. By the time we met, I had prepared for victory through direct confrontation, through siege warfare, through alliance building, through cutting supply lines, and through diplomatic negotiation. When the campaign began, my opponent's first 3 strategies failed because I was ready for each one. By his 4th attempt, he realized that fighting me was pointless, had an answer for everything he could try. He requested a meeting, and we resolved the conflict through negotiation. My preparation had made fighting unnecessary. This taught me that preparation isn't just about planning for what you expect to happen. It's about creating so many options that you can adapt to whatever actually happens. When you're thoroughly prepared, you operate from a position of calm confidence instead of desperate reaction in your workplace. This principle transforms how you handle challenges and opportunities. Most people prepare only for what they expect, then scramble when situations change. But when you prepare broadly, you're ready for whatever comes your way, and this readiness gives you enormous advantages. I learned to prepare my reputation before I needed it. I built relationships with people across different departments, not because I had immediate plans for them, but because I knew that future opportunities would require diverse connections. I developed skills that weren't immediately necessary for my current role, because I understood that tomorrow's challenges would demand capabilities I couldn't predict today. I also prepared emotionally and mentally for different types of situations. I practiced staying calm under criticism, remaining confident during uncertainty, and thinking clearly under pressure. This preparation meant that when difficult situations arose, I could respond strategically instead of reactively. The preparation chest taught me to always have multiple pathways to my goals. If promotion through my current department seemed blocked, I had built relationships in other areas. If one project failed, I had already laid groundwork for alternatives. If a particular approach wasn't working, I had other strategies ready to implement. Most importantly, thorough preparation builds the kind of confidence that makes fighting unnecessary. When you know you're ready for whatever happens, you don't feel the need to prove yourself through confrontation. You can afford to be patient because you know you have options. You can be generous in negotiations because you're not operating from desperation. People sense this confidence and respond differently to you. They're more likely to seek your partnership rather than opposition, because they recognize that you're prepared for success regardless of their cooperation. This makes collaboration more attractive than confrontation for everyone involved. The greatest victories are won by those who prepare so thoroughly that when opportunity arrives, success becomes inevitable. The Silk Scroll containing my vast intelligence network proved that information wins more battles than swords ever could. Each name and connection represented a crucial truth. Knowing what others don't gives you the power to avoid conflicts entirely, while achieving your objectives through superior understanding rather than superior force. My personal spy network wasn't built through bribes. or threats it was built through genuine relationships with people who valued what I offered in return. For their insights, I learned that the best intelligence comes from people who trust you, not people who fear you. This network included merchants who traveled between territories, servants who heard private conversations, scholars who understood political currents, and even enemy soldiers who respected my fair treatment of prisoners. The network taught me that information has multiple layers. Surface information tells you what is happening. Deeper information tells you why it's happening. The deepest information tells you what's going to happen next. Most generals focused only on troop movements and battle plans, but I was more interested in the personal struggles of enemy commanders, the economic pressures facing their kingdoms, and the political dynamics that would influence their future decisions. This intelligence prevented countless battles. I once learned that an enemy general was planning to attack our supply lines, but I also discovered that his daughter was seriously ill and he was desperate for a particular medicine that only we possessed. Instead of reinforcing our supply lines for a battle, I sent him the medicine along with our best physician. He abandoned his attack plans and eventually became one of my most reliable allies. In your workplace, intelligence gathering works similarly, but it's about understanding organizational dynamics, personal motivations, and unspoken agendas. The colleagues who seem to advance effortlessly aren't necessarily more talented. They're better informed about what matters to decision makers, what projects are gaining priority, and what changes are coming that will create new opportunities. I learned to build workplace relationships across all levels and departments. The administrative assistant often knows more about executive thinking than most managers do. The IT person understands which systems are failing and which upgrades are planned. The finance team knows where budget constraints are tightest and where new investments are possible. Each relationship became a source of insight that helped me make better decisions. But intelligence gathering isn't about gossip or manipulation. It's about understanding the true context of workplace dynamics. When you know that your boss is under pressure to reduce costs, you can frame your proposals to emphasize efficiency rather than innovation. When you understand that a colleague's resistance comes from fear of being marginalized, you can find ways to include them rather than override them. The most valuable intelligence is often about timing and priorities. Knowing when decisions are actually made, who really influences those decisions, and what criteria are actually used can transform your effectiveness. I learned to listen for what people were really worried about, what outcomes would make them look good, and what obstacles they were trying to overcome. This intelligence network created leverage without confrontation. When you understand what people truly need and want, you can position yourself as a solution rather than a problem. When you know about changes before they're announced, you can prepare to benefit from them instead of being disrupted by them. Information becomes power when you use it to create value for others rather than advantage for yourself. The network of whispers taught me that the person who helps others get what they want will always have allies, opportunities, and options. The silk threads that I called the puppet master's strings represented the invisible connections between understanding human nature and guiding outcomes without force. But these weren't strings of manipulation, they were threads of understanding that showed me how to align my goals with what people naturally wanted to do. True influence makes others feel like winners while you achieve your objectives. I discovered the psychology of influence through a situation that seemed impossible. I needed to convince a proud enemy commander to surrender a strategic position, but he had sworn an oath never to retreat. Direct negotiation was pointless. His honor was at stake. Threats would only make him more defiant. Force would work, but at enormous cost to both sides. Instead, I studied what motivated him beyond military duty. I learned that he was a devoted father whose greatest pride was his son's upcoming marriage. I also discovered that he was a scholar who had written poetry and valued intellectual discourse. Most importantly, I understood that his oath prevented retreat but said nothing about advancing to new positions. I sent him a wedding gift for his sun-rare silk that couldn't be obtained anywhere in his region. Along with it, I included some of my own poetry and a strategic analysis of the overall war that showed how his current position was becoming isolated and would soon be irrelevant to the larger conflict. Finally, I offered him command of a more important fortress that was currently vacant. Within a week, he had moved his entire force to the new position, fulfilling his oath never to retreat while giving me exactly what I needed. He felt honored by the respectful treatment, proud of the promotion, and satisfied that he had maintained his integrity. I achieved my objective without a battle, and he achieved his objectives without compromising his values. This taught me that influence isn't about getting people to do what they don't want to do. It's about understanding what they really want and showing them how your goals can help them achieve theirs. The most powerful influence makes people feel smarter, more valuable, and more successful for agreeing with you in your workplace. This psychology transforms how you approach every interaction. Instead of trying to convince people that your ideas are good, you focus on understanding what would make them feel good about implementing your ideas. Instead of arguing for what you want, you discover what they want and find connections. I learned to identify what energized different personality types. Some people are motivated by recognition and want to be seen as innovative leaders. Others are driven by security and want to avoid risk or criticism. Some thrive on problem-solving challenges, while others prefer collaborative harmony. Understanding these drives allowed me to present the same idea in different ways to different people. The key insight was that resistance usually comes from unmet psychological needs, not logical disagreement. The colleague who argues with your proposals might need to feel heard and valued. The manager who delays decisions might need more information to feel confident. The team member who resists changes might need assurance that their expertise is still valued. I developed techniques for addressing these underlying needs while advancing my objectives. I learned to ask questions that made people feel smart for knowing the answers. I found ways to give others credit for improvements to my ideas. I created situations where supporting my proposals made others look good to their own supervisors. The puppet master's strings taught me that the highest form of influence makes others feel like they're influencing you. When people feel heard, valued, and smart, they naturally want to continue the relationship that creates those feelings. This transforms potential opponents into enthusiastic collaborators who are invested in your mutual success. True influence creates loyalty because it makes people feel better about themselves. The bronze scales of mutual victory taught me that every conflict could be transformed into mutual benefit if approached with the right mindset. These scales represented perfect balance, not the balance of equal compromise, but the balance of aligned interests where everyone gets what they truly need. I learned this through one of my most memorable transformations of an enemy into a lifelong ally. There was a warlord who had been raiding our territory for years. Every previous attempt to stop him had failed because generals approached it as a zero-sum game. Either we won and he lost, or he won and we lost. The raids continued because destroying him completely would have required enormous resources, but anything less than total victory left him free to continue attacking. I decided to study what this warlord actually wanted. I discovered that he wasn't raiding for pleasure or conquest. He was trying to feed his people during a prolonged drought that had destroyed their agriculture. His raids were successful enough to keep his followers alive, but not successful enough to solve the underlying problem. He was trapped in a cycle of survival that made him our enemy. Instead of planning another military campaign, I sent him a proposal that seemed crazy to my advisors. I offered to help him relocate his entire population to fertile land on our borders, where they could establish permanent settlements. In exchange, they would become our frontier guards, protecting our expanded territory from other threats. I would provide the initial supplies and support needed for them to establish agriculture, and they would become productive citizens rather than desperate raiders. My advisors argued that I was rewarding an enemy, but I saw it differently. I was solving the underlying problem that created the conflict in the first place. The warlord's raids weren't motivated by hatred of us. They were motivated by love for his people. Once I addressed that motivation constructively, the raids became unnecessary. The proposal worked beyond my expectations. Not only did the raids stop, but these former enemies became some of our most dedicated defenders. They knew the value of the peace and prosperity we had helped them achieve, and they were determined to protect it. Within 5 years, their settlements had become thriving towns that contributed significantly to our economy and security. This taught me that win-win scenarios aren't about everyone getting everything they want. They're about everyone getting what they actually need. The difference is crucial. What people want is often just their best guess at how to get what they need. When you can identify and address the underlying needs, you can often find solutions that work better for everyone than anyone's original demands. In your workplace, this principle transforms how you handle conflicts and negotiations. Instead of fighting over positions, you explore interests. Instead of defending your proposals against criticism, you use criticism to create better solutions that address everyone's concerns. Instead of viewing colleagues as competitors for limited resources, you find ways to expand the resources or share them more effectively. I learned to ask different questions when conflicts arose. Instead of "how can I win this?" I asked, "what does everyone actually need here?" Instead of "how can I get them to agree with me?" I asked, "how can we create something that works better for all of us?" Instead of "who's right?" I asked, "what would right look like for everyone involved?" The scales taught me that sustainable victories require sustainable relationships. When you defeat someone completely, you create resentment that will eventually cause problems. When you compromise in ways that leave everyone partially dissatisfied, you create weak solutions that fall apart under pressure. But when you create genuine mutual benefit, you build allies who have personal stakes in your continued success. Building win-win scenarios requires creativity and patience. You have to understand multiple perspectives deeply enough to see connections that aren't obvious to people focused only on their own needs. You have to be willing to expand your thinking beyond your original assumptions about what's possible. The bronze scales reminded me daily that balance creates strength, and that the strongest victories are the ones where former opponents become invested in your future success. The bamboo warrior's staff taught me that flexibility could be stronger than rigidity, that bending without breaking was often superior to standing firm and shattering. This simple weapon became my teacher in one of the most important lessons of my career. Sometimes yielding creates more power than resisting. I learned this during a campaign where everything went wrong. My carefully planned strategy collapsed when unexpected allies betrayed us, whether disrupted our supply lines, and enemy reinforcements arrived earlier than predicted. My initial response was to fight harder, to force my original plan to work, despite the changed circumstances. This rigidity nearly cost me everything. My bamboo staff, which I used for walking and occasional combat, survived situations that broke steel swords and iron spears. When struck with overwhelming force, it bent almost to the ground but sprang back unharmed. When caught in storms that snapped oak trees, it swayed with the wind and emerged intact. This flexibility wasn't weakness, it was a different kind of strength. I began applying this principle to my strategy. Instead of insisting on my original plan, I adapted to the new reality. Instead of trying to force favorable conditions, I worked with the conditions that existed. Instead of fighting against the current of events, I found ways to use that current to carry me toward my objectives. The campaign that had seemed lost became one of my greatest victories, but not through the path I had originally planned. By remaining flexible, I was able to take advantage of opportunities that my rigid thinking had prevented me from seeing. The betrayal of our allies revealed weaknesses in the enemy coalition. The supply disruptions forced us to live off the land, which made us more mobile than our heavily supplied opponents. The early arrival of enemy reinforcements actually worked in our favor, because they weren't properly coordinated with existing forces. In your workplace, this flexibility becomes crucial for long-term success. I've watched talented people destroy their careers by becoming too attached to specific approaches, unwilling to adapt when circumstances changed. They fought for strategies that were no longer relevant, defended positions that were no longer defensible, and refused to modify their methods when new information became available. The bamboo staff taught me that there's a difference between having principles and being rigid. Your core values and ultimate objectives can remain constant while your methods and tactics remain fluid. You can be absolutely committed to your destination while remaining completely flexible about your route. I learned to hold my plans lightly. Every strategy was a hypothesis to be tested, not a sacred truth to be defended. When evidence suggested that my approach wasn't working, I treated it as valuable information rather than personal failure. When unexpected obstacles appeared, I looked for ways to use them as stepping stones, rather than trying to bulldoze through them. This flexibility also applied to working with people. I stopped trying to change others to fit my preferred working style and started adapting my communication to match their preferences. If someone needed detailed analysis before making decisions, I provided detailed analysis. If someone preferred quick summaries, I gave them quick summaries. If someone responded better to logic, I emphasized logic. If someone was motivated by relationships, I emphasized relationships. The strength of flexibility isn't about being weak or directionless. It's about being responsive and adaptable while maintaining your core integrity. Like bamboo, you can bend dramatically without breaking, survive storms that destroy more rigid structures, and spring back to your original position when the pressure passes. This flexibility ultimately made me more powerful, not less, because people knew they could count on me to find solutions rather than create problems when plans needed to change. The ceramic vessel that I kept filled with oil reminded me daily to preserve my forces for battles that truly mattered, avoiding waste on meaningless conflicts. This vessel taught me one of my hardest lessons after I nearly burned out completely. From fighting every battle that came my way, regardless of its importance or strategic value. Early in my career, I believed that a great general should never back down from any challenge. My pride demanded that I respond to every provocation, answer every criticism, and fight every fight that presented itself. I thought this made me look strong and decisive. Instead, it nearly destroyed me and my army through sheer exhaustion. The breaking point came during a campaign where I found myself fighting on 7 different fronts simultaneously. Each conflict had seemed important when it started, but none of them were actually crucial to my overall objectives. I was spending enormous resources on battles that, even if won, wouldn't significantly advance my position. Meanwhile, truly important opportunities were passing by because I lacked the energy and resources to pursue them. My soldiers were exhausted, my supplies were depleted, and my reputation was suffering because I appeared scattered and unfocused. The ceramic vessel, which had once been full of oil for lamps and cooking, sat empty because we had burned through our resources on conflicts that didn't matter. That empty vessel became my teacher. I realized that energy and attention are finite resources that must be invested wisely. Every hour spent on a meaningless argument is an hour not spent on meaningful progress. Every emotional investment in a pointless conflict is emotional energy unavailable for important relationships. Every strategic focus diluted across irrelevant battles is strategic power that can't be concentrated where it matters most. I developed criteria for choosing my battles. I asked myself, will winning this conflict significantly advance my ultimate objectives? Is this the right time to engage, or would waiting be more strategic? Do I have the resources to win decisively, or will this drag on indefinitely? What are the real costs of fighting versus the real costs of walking away? Most importantly, is this battle necessary, or is it just feeding my ego? The vessel taught me that some battles aren't worth winning. Sometimes the cost of victory exceeds the value of the prize. Sometimes engaging in a fight gives your opponent exactly what they want: your time, attention, and energy diverted from more important matters. Sometimes the wisest response to provocation is no response at all. In your workplace, this principle becomes crucial for maintaining your effectiveness and sanity. I've watched talented people exhaust themselves fighting every small injustice, responding to every criticism, and getting involved in every office drama. They become known as people who create conflict rather than solve problems, and their actual contributions get overshadowed by their reputation for being difficult. Learning to disengage from pointless conflicts preserves your energy for opportunities that matter. It protects your reputation as someone who focuses on important things. It demonstrates emotional maturity and strategic thinking. Most importantly, it keeps your relationships intact for times when you really need support. The strategic retreat isn't cowardice, it's conservation of power for battles that truly matter. The ceramic vessel reminded me that wisdom lies in knowing which hills are worth dying on, and which ones are better left unquered. Your energy is precious. Guard it carefully and invest it wisely. The simple crown that represented leadership through inspiration rather than intimidation taught me how others follow willingly when they believe in both the leader and the vision. This crown wasn't made of gold or jewels, it was carved from wood by one of my soldiers after a battle where I had shared the same risks and hardships as everyone else. That humble crown became more precious to me than any imperial treasure because it represented earned respect rather than imposed authority. I learned the difference between commanding and compelling through a costly mistake early in my leadership. I had been promoted to command a regiment of veterans who had served under popular leaders before me. I thought I needed to establish dominance immediately, so I imposed strict new rules, demanded absolute obedience, and punished any questioning of my orders. The result was technical compliance, but zero enthusiasm. My soldiers did exactly what I commanded and nothing more. They followed orders, but never showed initiative, never offered suggestions, and never went beyond the minimum required. The contrast became clear when I observed another commander whose troops would follow him anywhere. His soldiers didn't just obey, they anticipated his needs, solved problems before he knew they existed, and volunteered for dangerous missions. The difference wasn't in their orders or punishments, but in how the soldiers felt about their leader and their mission. I began studying what created that kind of loyalty. I discovered that people don't follow leaders because they have to, they follow leaders because they want to. They follow leaders who make them feel valued, who share meaningful visions, who demonstrate genuine care for their welfare, and who show by example what excellence looks like. The wooden crown represented my transformation from a commander who demanded obedience to a leader who inspired dedication. I started sharing my strategic thinking with my officers, asking for their input on tactical decisions, and explaining not just what we were doing, but why it mattered. I made sure my soldiers understood how their individual contributions fit into the larger mission and how that mission served purposes they could believe in. More importantly, I began leading by example instead of just giving orders. When supplies were short. I ate the same rations as everyone else. When conditions were difficult, I endured the same hardships. When danger was greatest, I positioned myself where the risk was highest. My authority came not from my rank, but from my willingness to embody the standards I expected from others. In your workplace, this principle transforms how you influence teams and colleagues. People don't follow job titles, they follow individuals who demonstrate competence, integrity, and genuine investment in shared success. Whether you're officially managing others or trying to lead a project team, your influence depends on inspiration rather than intimidation. I learned to create followers by making people feel like partners in something meaningful. Instead of just assigning tasks, I helped people understand how their work contributed to larger objectives they could take pride in. Instead of micromanaging execution, I clearly communicated desired outcomes and trusted people to find the best methods. Instead of taking credit for successes, I made sure recognition went to those who did the actual work. The most powerful leadership makes others feel more capable, not less. When people work with you, they should feel smarter, more valued, and more confident about their abilities. This creates a positive cycle where they want to continue the relationship that makes them feel good about themselves. The wooden crown taught me that true authority comes from serving others' growth rather than demanding their submission. When you help others succeed, they become invested in your success as well. The bronze key that unlocked the secret to changing opposition into cooperation taught me that every difficult person is simply someone whose lock of human nature I hadn't yet learnt to open. This key represented one of my most challenging transformations, my harshest critic into one of my most valuable allies, through patience and understanding rather than force or argument. There was a subordinate commander who opposed nearly everything I proposed. He questioned my strategies in front of other officers, delayed implementing my orders, and seemed determined to undermine my authority. My advisors suggested transferring him or disciplining him severely, but I was curious about what drove such consistent opposition from someone who was otherwise competent and respected by his troops. Instead of confronting him directly, I spent weeks observing and listening. I discovered that his resistance wasn't personal, it came from deep frustration with previous commanders who had made decisions without consulting experienced officers, leading to unnecessary casualties among his men. He wasn't opposing me. He was trying to protect his soldiers from what he saw as potentially dangerous leadership patterns. Once I understood his motivation, everything changed. Instead of fighting his resistance, I addressed his underlying concern. I began including him in strategic planning sessions, asking for his input on tactical decisions, and showing him that I valued the experience and knowledge he brought. I demonstrated through actions that I was the kind of leader who listened to his officers and cared about minimizing casualties. The transformation was remarkable. Within months, he became one of my strongest supporters, not because I had convinced him to agree with me, but because I had proven that his core concerns were my concerns too. His opposition turned into passionate advocacy because he finally felt heard and valued. The bronze key taught me that difficult behavior usually has rational roots. Even when those roots aren't immediately obvious, people aren't difficult for the sake of being difficult. They're trying to protect something they value, get something they need, or prevent something they fear. Once you understand what's driving the behavior, you can address the cause instead of fighting the symptoms in your workplace. This principle transforms how you handle challenging colleagues. The person who shoots down ideas in meetings might be trying to prevent mistakes that could reflect poorly on the team. The colleague who seems uncooperative might feel excluded from important decisions. The manager who micromanages might be under pressure from their own superiors and feeling insecure about delegation. I developed a systematic approach to understanding difficult people. I would observe what triggered their defensive behaviors and what situations brought out their best qualities. I listened for clues about their professional fears, personal values, and past experiences that might be influencing their current behavior. Most importantly, I looked for ways to make them feel successful rather than threatened by working with me. The key insight was that transformation requires patience and consistent action over time. You can't change someone's behavior with a single conversation or gesture. Trust builds gradually through repeated experiences that prove your intentions are genuine. The person who has been defensive for years won't become cooperative overnight, but they will respond to sustained evidence that you're different from the leaders who created their defensive patterns. I learned to celebrate small improvements rather than expecting dramatic changes. When someone who usually criticized offered neutral feedback, I treated it as progress. When someone who typically resisted began asking questions instead of objecting, I recognized it as movement in the right direction. These incremental changes eventually led to complete transformations in working relationships. The bronze key reminded me that the patience required for human transformation is always worth the investment. When you help someone shift from opposition to cooperation, you gain not just their compliance but their commitment. Not just their obedience, but their initiative. Every difficult person is a locked door. Find the right key, and you'll discover an ally inside. The clear crystal that helped me see beyond immediate battles to long-term consequences and opportunities became my guide for thinking beyond the present moment. This oracle's crystal taught me that the decisions you make today determine the battles you'll face tomorrow, and that true strategy requires the vision to see connections across time that others miss. I learned this lesson through a victory that turned into a disaster because I had focused only on winning the immediate battle without considering the broader implications. I had defeated a rival kingdom decisively, but my methods were so harsh that neighboring rulers became terrified of my growing power. What seemed like a great victory created a coalition of enemies that took years to resolve and cost far more than the original conflict. The crystal became my tool for examining every decision through multiple time horizons. Before taking any action, I would ask myself, what will the consequences be in 1 month, 1 year, and 10 years? How will this decision affect my relationships, my reputation, and my future options? What precedent am I setting, and how might others respond to that precedent? This long-term thinking transformed my approach to everything. Instead of just winning battles, I focused on creating conditions that would prevent future battles. Instead of defeating enemies, I looked for ways to turn them into allies or neutral parties. Instead of maximizing short-term gains, I optimized for sustainable advantages that would compound over time. I began building what I called strategic patience, the ability to accept smaller immediate returns in exchange for larger future benefits. When other generals were fighting costly battles for temporary territorial gains, I was investing in relationships, infrastructure, and reputation that would pay dividends for decades. When rivals were burning resources on impressive but unsustainable campaigns, I was developing systems and alliances that would outlast any individual conflict in your workplace. This long-term strategic thinking becomes your competitive advantage. While others focus on immediate wins and short-term metrics, you can build career momentum that accumulates over time. The colleague who gets promoted quickly by stepping on others often hits a ceiling when their reputation catches up with them. The person who builds genuine relationships and develops real skills creates sustainable success that accelerates over time. I learned to think about my career as a series of interconnected chapters rather than isolated events. Each role became preparation for future opportunities. Each relationship became part of a network that would create options down the road. Each skill I developed became part of a portfolio that would remain valuable regardless of changing circumstances. The crystal showed me that playing the long game requires different strategies than playing for immediate wins. It means being generous with credit and recognition, because the goodwill you create today becomes political capital you can use later. It means investing in learning and development even when it doesn't provide immediate benefits. It means building bridges instead of burning them, even with people who can't help you right now. Strategic patience also means recognizing that some battles aren't worth winning if they damage your long-term position. The argument you win today might cost you an important relationship tomorrow. The promotion you fight for aggressively might limit your options for future advancement. The political victory that makes you enemies might create problems that outweigh the benefits. Developed the habit of regularly reviewing my long-term objectives and ensuring that my daily actions were aligned with my ultimate goals. This prevented me from getting caught up in urgent but unimportant conflicts that could derail my strategic progress. The Oracle's crystal taught me that true victory comes not from winning the most battles, but from creating the conditions where your success becomes inevitable over time. The bridge between worlds showed me how timeless principles adapt to modern challenges while maintaining their essential power. Though I lived over 2,000 years ago, the fundamental patterns of human nature, conflict, and cooperation remain unchanged. What has changed are the tools and contexts, but the underlying strategies for winning without fighting are as relevant today as they were on ancient battlefields. Let me show you how these principles apply to your specific workplace situations. When you're in a meeting where someone aggressively challenges your proposal, remember the supreme excellence principle. Instead of defending your idea through argument, ask questions that help you understand their concerns. What would need to be different for this approach to work for your team? This transforms confrontation into collaboration and often reveals solutions that work better for everyone. In email communications, apply the positioning principle. Before sending that strongly worded response to criticism, pause and consider your strategic position. Sometimes the most powerful response is no immediate response at all. Sometimes a brief acknowledgement followed by a private conversation is more effective than a public debate. Position yourself as someone who solves problems rather than creates them. When dealing with a micromanaging boss, use the intelligence gathering approach. Instead of resisting their oversight, seek to understand what they're really worried about. Are they under pressure from their own superiors? Do they lack confidence in their team? Are they trying to prevent specific types of mistakes? Once you understand their fears, you can address them proactively rather than reactively. For negotiating salary increases or promotions, apply the timing and preparation principles. Don't just ask when you need more money, position your request when your value is most visible and your boss is most receptive. Prepared by documenting your contributions, understanding budget cycles, and researching market rates. Create conditions where saying yes serves their interests as well as yours. When building influence across departments, use the network development strategies. Invest time in understanding what each department values, what challenges they face, and how your work can support their objectives. Offer help before you need favors. Share credit generously. Build relationships during calm periods so they're available during crisis moments. In remote work environments, the principles remain the same but require digital adaptation. Flexibility becomes crucial when team members work across time zones and communication styles. Intelligence gathering happens through virtual coffee chats and careful attention to digital body language. Positioning occurs through strategic participation in video calls and thoughtful contributions to online discussions. For project management, apply the win-win scenario creation. When stakeholders have conflicting requirements, don't choose sides. Creative solutions that address everyone's core needs. When deadlines seem impossible, Don't just push harder, explore whether the underlying objectives can be met through different approaches. When handling difficult team members remotely, the patience and understanding principles become even more important. You can't rely on casual conversations to build relationships, so you must be more intentional about creating connection. You can't read body language as easily, so you must listen more carefully to verbal cues and ask more direct questions about concerns. The technology changes, but human nature remains constant. People still want to feel valued, understood, and successful. They still resist when they feel threatened and cooperate when they feel supported. They still follow leaders who inspire them and avoid leaders who intimidate them. Your smartphone gives you instant communication, but the wisdom of timing still applies. Knowing when to send messages, when to make calls, and when to wait for better moments. Your data analytics provide detailed metrics, but the principle of strategic thinking still matters. Understanding what the numbers really mean for long-term success rather than just short-term performance. The bridge between worlds reminds us that while tools evolve, wisdom endures. The art of winning without fighting adapts to every context while maintaining its core truth. The highest skill is achieving your objectives while making others feel like winners too. The eternal flame of wisdom burns continuously, representing how true understanding creates lasting change that extends far beyond the individual. As I reflect on my greatest peaceful victories, the battles avoided, the enemies transformed into allies, the conflicts resolved through understanding rather than force, I see that the most powerful legacy isn't the territories conquered, but the wisdom passed forward to future generations. My most satisfying victory wasn't a military campaign at all. It was watching a young officer who had learned my principles successfully negotiate a peace treaty that prevented a war between two kingdoms. He had studied the art of winning without fighting, and when the moment came, he knew exactly how to apply it. No blood was shed, both kingdoms prospered, and thousands of families remained intact. That single application of these principles created more lasting value than any battle I ever won. This is what I want for you, not just personal success, but the wisdom to create solutions that elevate everyone around you. When you master the art of winning without fighting, you become someone who makes situations better rather than worse, who builds bridges instead of walls, who creates opportunities instead of obstacles. Your transformation from fighter to strategic winner will happen gradually, but it will be unmistakable. You'll notice that conflicts resolve more smoothly when you're involved. Colleagues will start seeking your input on difficult situations because they know you'll find constructive approaches. Your reputation will shift from someone who creates drama to someone who prevents it. This transformation extends beyond your immediate workplace success. When you consistently demonstrate that strength can be gentle, that power can be generous, and that winning can include everyone, you influence how others approach their own challenges. Your example becomes a model that spreads through your organization and beyond. I challenge you to begin implementing these principles immediately, but start small. Choose one minor workplace conflict and approach it with curiosity instead of defensiveness. Take one difficult colleague and invest time in understanding their perspective. Pick one negotiation and focus on creating mutual benefit rather than maximizing your own advantage. Pay attention to the results. Notice how people respond differently when you approach them with genuine interest in their concerns. Observe how conflicts de-escalate when you focus on understanding rather than being understood. Watch how opportunities open up when you build reputation for solving problems rather than creating them. As you develop these skills, remember that mastery takes time and practice. I spent decades learning to consistently apply these principles under pressure. There will be moments when your ego wants to fight, when your frustration demands immediate action, when the old patterns feel easier than the new approaches. This is normal and expected. The eternal flame reminds us that wisdom grows stronger when shared. As you become more skilled at winning without fighting, teach others through your example. Mentor colleagues who are struggling with workplace conflicts. Share what you've learned with team members who are burning out from too much fighting. Help create a culture where strategic thinking replaces reactive fighting. Your legacy isn't just about your own success. It's about the positive changes you create in your workplace, your relationships, and your community. When you consistently demonstrate that there are better ways to handle conflicts, you give others permission to try those approaches too. The compound effect of this wisdom is extraordinary. One person who masters the art of winning without fighting influences dozens of others. Those people influence hundreds more. Over time, entire organizations can shift toward more collaborative, strategic, and peaceful approaches to challenges. This is how lasting change happens, not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through consistent demonstration of better ways to achieve objectives. Your daily choices to seek understanding instead of demanding agreement, to build bridges instead of defending positions, to create solutions instead of winning arguments. These choices accumulate into a reputation and influence that extends far beyond what you can immediately see. The eternal flame of wisdom that I am passing to you is meant to burn brightly in your life and then be passed forward to others. Take what you've learned, apply it consistently, and watch as the art of winning without fighting transforms not just your own success, but the success of everyone whose life you touch. The greatest victory is creating a world where victory includes everyone. That legacy starts with your very next interaction.